Okay. I'm recording this now before I lose my nerve. I just had a conversation with two students who are in practicum training, who are learning with the Institute for Research and Education in Trauma-Informed Spiritual Intervention. And I was telling them how it feels to talk in ways that I'm about to talk right now. And the reason why I decided to go ahead and post this video and share this is because they made compelling points. I'm going to tell my story about how I went from a substitute teacher to running an institute. And even saying that is, I don't mind talking or teaching. I'm really comfortable on stages and with the microphone. I'm not particularly shy or self-conscious, but there is a lot of my story that I neglect to share because sometimes I feel like it might not be as important, or it might not be necessary, it might not be relevant, because at the end of the day, the impact that I know I'm going for, and every person who has joined the team and who does this work, the impact that we're going for is cultural, it's national, it's global, it's personal, but it's not personal impact for a show or for content. It's personal impact that transforms us and makes us better prepared to do the work that we do, to do ministry. So I'm gonna tell my story because it needs to be told, and my hope is that you might see yourself in my story, or you might feel courage to share your story, or even partner with the Institute to develop your story and to add to your story. So in 2015, I'll put pictures. In 2014, I graduated from Louisiana State University with a Bachelor of Science in Psychology. It was a degree that I felt was definitely a divine pursuit. I went into my bachelor studies in architecture, and because I still create spaces, I feel like that degree was not a waste. And the 2 years that I spent in that program were not a waste at all. But the last 2 years of my bachelor undergrad, the last 2.5 years, I studied psychology. This is 2012, 19 years old. But I was growing steadily in my relationship with God. And so when I found out that I would not be completing my degree in architecture, I felt lost. I felt a little bit in shock and disbelief. In an odd way, I knew that I wouldn't be completing my degree in architecture, but there was still a sense of reality that a decision needed to be made. And I didn't know what that decision was going to be until I prayed about it. And after praying about it, I got this epiphany, what felt like a huge download to me. And this is common knowledge now. But back in 2012, for a 19-year-old girl who didn't know anything about psychology, I had this epiphany, this revelation that who adults are is a direct reflection of what their experiences were as children. And I got really curious about how children develop, and I got really inspired to learn about child development, human development, and I landed on a degree decision to pivot into psychology. So I graduated in 2014. I became a substitute teacher at the end of my degree program. As much as I wanted to study child psychology, I really felt more led to experience children. And I don't know if this was, I don't think it was like just logically speaking, but I felt like children spent most of their time in schools. And so it would only be natural for me to also be in school so that I could see what was happening when they were spending 80% of their day away from home. I was a substitute teacher from August 2014 to December 2014. And I got inspired to see more places. So I left Baton Rouge and I moved to Atlanta, Georgia, somewhere between studying psychology. It was actually my first psychology class. Someone came into the room to give a presentation about international student volunteers. And there was an invitation to travel to South Africa and do not religious-based missions there, but just volunteer there for the different things that they were already doing in that space. It's so funny. I'm thinking about this now that it was my first semester in my first psychology class that I was invited to do sort of a volunteer missions trip. And when I got back from South Africa, I realized that the world was so big and that I did not want to stay in Louisiana for my whole life. So at the end of 2014, I decided I wanted to move somewhere. It was either between California or Georgia because I had family in both places. And I ultimately landed on moving to Georgia because it was an easier move and it just made more sense to me. I remember my first night in Atlanta trying to get on the interstate and experiencing cars whizzing by. It was like the biggest city that I had ever driven in. It was bigger than Baton Rouge, but it was still smaller than New York, which is where I live now. The speed limit in New York is slower, but it's still way more chaotic here. My time in Atlanta was really crucial for a lot of reasons. I got an opportunity to experience different things. Obviously, I met different people, reconnected with a friend that I knew from high school. Didn't know her that well then, but grew close to her. I got to experience, being a graduate, and not necessarily being under my parents. I still lived with my sister, but it was the exposure that I think I needed to be able to start dreaming and thinking about what my life could be outside of the experiences that I already had up to that point. This picture was taken around the time that I first had my initial experiences with Deliverance ministry. And my initial experience was completely out of the blue. I had no idea what Atlanta would bring for me, but it definitely added a brand new dimension of my life's calling. And I say that because, there is this layer of architecture, this layer of creating spaces that are intentionally designed, that are considering environment and factors, and that are supporting human movement and activities. And then there's this layer of psychology that wouldn't necessarily lead to a clinical destination, but motivated a lot of what I would do for the rest of my life. And then being a teacher, which I don't know if I said that already. Yes, I said it already. Being a teacher was this third part of my life that I fell in love with, and then Deliverance. So 4 dimensions in a 3-year period. I didn't see how it was all coming together, but it was all coming together. So I learned about deliverance through immersion. I learned about it because I was praying for someone, and I was also talking to my then long distance boyfriend, and the things that were happening while I was on the call with the person I was praying for and talking to him, it all amounted to like, hey, I think this is deliverance. I think, this is what's happening. And I literally spent hours throughout the night learning everything that I could about deliverance. And I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. Okay. But something was happening. And I was right in the middle of it. So I did a lot of research, and I called this person back like the next day, and we probably had a few other conversations throughout 2015 that were just focused on deliverance. And the more that I was learning, the more I was seeing the power of God flow through me in deliverance. And it felt like no big deal. Like, wow, that's crazy. Definitely didn't feel like something that I would be doing for the rest of my life. But 2015 was more formative than I originally imagined, because I wasn't doing much. I was going home, going to school, writing blogs, on social media, a loner a lot of the time, like in my room by myself, in the quiet, not talking to anybody. And so there were events in 2015 that I just didn't know would be relevant. And one of them was meeting my now husband. So I met him in 2015, April 2015. We got to know each other a lot more near the summer. Near the fall of 2015, we started seriously talking about what it meant to do life and purpose together. And then by April of 2016, we were married. And the reason why I'm saying this is because it was him who was able to tell me, like, hey, I think that you might be experiencing, like, seeing deliverance happen. And then a lot of our marriage from 2016 to, spotty times in 2017, and then 2018 and on, we found ourselves in deliverance ministry together. A lot of it was me, watching him, because he grew up Jamaican Pentecostal. So, I was in the ministry because God tossed me in. He was in the ministry because he was familiar with it. And I believe God called us both to it, but we definitely came into the ministry from two different angles. So a lot of the time I was like watching him, getting wisdom from the Lord. I'm learning, but I'm learning from him too. And there were times where he was also learning from me, but I didn't identify with the ministry as something that I needed to do, or that was even intentionally designed, or that I was intentionally designed for. So from 2016 up to 2018, we talked a lot about it. We, created opportunities for ministry out of our home, and at the same time we were growing our family. So in 2017, I actually I became pregnant with our first child. I was teaching. I was a full-time classroom teacher, not a substitute teacher anymore. I was a full-time classroom teacher. I was making my way to like be certified as a teacher. I was learning so much about pedagogy, lesson objectives, data, outcomes, criteria for success, all of the teacher things. I was learning it and practicing it, and that's when I found out that teaching works. There was a point where I thought I would be a classroom teacher for the rest of my life. I thought I would be at that school for the rest of my life. And as ignorant as it is, I thought that I would have the same school leaders that I had then for the rest of my life. I just wanted to be there forever. I craved stability so much. I craved a one-track path, clear end, clear outcome. And my life has been everything but that, but I craved it so much, and I really wanted to settle in classroom teaching because I loved it, and I believe that it worked. Excuse me. And for a long time, that's what I did through having kids and through the pandemic. I was a teacher. But somewhere around 2020, my husband and I had done a bunch of deliverance sessions by that time, like hundreds. And what I started to notice is a lot of people had questions about deliverance ministry. A lot of people desired deliverance ministry, but not many people had enough information about it to be confident in providing deliverance ministry and operating in it and co-laboring with God in deliverance ministry. So a lot of our ministry was to people who desired it, who desired something deeper, who had some level of exposure to it. It ranged from no exposure to some, to a lot of experience, to people who may even have been deliverance ministers on their own. And so we got really fluent in helping people understand what deliverance is, why we do it the way we do it, how it's represented in scripture, how it's supported in the gospel, and how it applies to them specifically. We had to get fluent in some level of apologetics and being able to explain to people why a Christian can have an unclean spirit. We had to be able to explain some degree of why things happen, but more than anything, we had to explain how God's intervention shows up in deliverance ministry and how discipleship helps to support that process. After sharing that with so many people, it occurred to me that there are some people who are actually called to deliverance ministry who need to have this information, not just for themselves, but for other people who they would eventually be serving or who they were already serving, but didn't necessarily have the language or the confidence to take them through deliverance ministry and help people encounter God, the deliverer. So in 2020, I created a course called Women in Deliverance. This is the workbook, and it was free. Most of the courses at that time that I had ever taught were free, honestly. If it was a deliverance course, it was free. And the focus was deliverance and discipleship in the modern church. So we worked together from, I think, March of 2020 to maybe August. I'm not completely remembering that timeline, but we walked through all things deliverance, and then we deployed discipleship pairs, and we worked on the relationship between deliverance and discipleship, and really cultivating a sense of responsibility around those two types and approaches to ministry. There were Bible studies, there were all types of things. And I found women who were like, yeah, I want to learn more. I want to keep talking about this. I want to keep doing this. And for me, I felt the same way. I want to keep talking about this. I want to keep doing this. I want to keep teaching, so that even if I can't offer deliverance ministry, I know someone else who can. Even if I can't disciple, I know someone else who can. And I have a network of people who will share this responsibility with me. So I started with women, and then in 2022, after I had my second child, I started hearing this idea, this concept of trauma informed. And when I say hearing, I don't mean I saw people talking about it on Instagram. I'm not saying I saw people talk about it on social media. it was just an idea that kept popping up. In 2021, I paused when I became pregnant. I was due November 2021, so I stopped teaching. The post-pandemic education world was not like it was in 2017, and I started thinking very seriously about my business, which when it started was Flamingo Trauma Recovery. It still is Flamingo Trauma Recovery. It just now has a more explicit branch to it that is dealing with trauma-informed spiritual care. But I took a break from teaching, and I spent the rest of 2021 and a good chunk of 2022 honing this skill of merging discipleship and spiritual counseling. But the way that I was practicing it and the way that I was doing it was very different. It wasn't spiritual direction. It wasn't biblical counseling. It definitely wasn't anything clinical. I knew that was different. It wasn't coaching. But I had to do it. And not only did I have to do it, people were being referred to receive this service from me, which that's God, because I had no skill with marketing. Like I was talking about what I was doing. I was offering spiritual counseling, but a lot of what I got to do in 2021, 2022, and even with Deliverance ministry years prior, it was all by word of mouth. So in 2021, I'm offering what this service that I'm I can't call it discipleship because it's not that. I can't call it spiritual direction because I've never been trained in that. I know it's not clinical. What is it? And I landed on this term, spiritual counseling. And I had this framework that I used. I trusted it. I didn't have language, but I trusted it and I did it. And at the same time that I'm offering this spiritual counseling, I'm also getting this idea about trauma-informed God. It's like by that time I had written 2 books. And so when I heard trauma-informed God, I'm like, not another book. Because writing books, it's a process. And it wasn't one that I was kind of looking for as being postpartum. Just had my second child. Not working, trying to figure out what business means when you're not working, working for someone with benefits and stuff like that. But I kept hearing it, trauma-informed God and trauma-informed deliverance. So these 2 things were rolling out pretty much at the same time. I was writing a devotional called Trauma-Informed God. It was a 7-day devotional, and that's where I did a lot of research around what trauma-informed is, what it means, the history, the concepts within it. And I partnered with my husband to do trauma-informed deliverance, which was a course. It was another, I think there might have been a small fee for this course, but as with anything that we had ever done, it was free for some people because we were exploring this idea of trauma-informed deliverance. Knowing what it meant to be trauma-informed gave us the confidence to say, like, yeah, the work that we have been doing up to this point has been trauma-informed. But in writing the devotional and in offering the course, it gave us an opportunity to get really concrete and really serious about what it means to be trauma-informed, in that trauma-informed is not a feeling and it's not walking on eggshells. It's a strategy. And there is a lot of intentional deconstruction that has to take place, and inquiry and questioning that may need to take place for us to really be able to embody trauma-informed care. So in doing the devotional and in teaching the course, it felt like we had something. But in 2023, I went back into schools, and that kind of took up a lot of my time. The same way that it did near the end of the school year in 2021 when I decided I'm not doing this anymore. I went back into schools, and it was more of the same, except this time we weren't, teaching virtually. It was sort of a hybrid type of situation when I left, and now it was everyone is back in classrooms. I was teaching at a different school altogether, different grade levels, different dynamics. And I left the spiritual counseling, trauma-informed God, trauma-informed deliverance kind of on the back burner so that I could focus on income, provision, the way that I had always understood it. But that didn't mean that the idea stopped. And that's the crazy thing, because 2022 went through, we finished the course, and by 2023, I was still having all of these ideas about deliverance and these ideas about responsibility and what God was calling me to. Not just me and my husband, but what he was calling me to. Why he allowed me to experience deliverance ministry and like discover deliverance ministry in the way he allowed me to discover it. Not with my husband, but alongside him at the same time. So I had to come to terms with the fact that there was a purpose that God called me to. And that was probably the hardest thing, getting all of these ideas, being invited to speak at places and to talk about the things that people had come to know me for, but I didn't necessarily identify with it personally. And I wanted so much to just detach from it, to decenter myself from it. I mean, I think that when I heard trauma-informed deliverance, like even as a course, I actually asked my husband to take the lead on it, because I did not want my life to be centered around deliverance. I didn't want that to be what people knew me for. And I also didn't want to wear it as some type of badge. Like I am the deliverance minister. I never saw it that way. I don't see it that way. And I don't think it's healthy to see it that way. But 2023, I felt a call back to the work that I was called to. So I started sending newsletters again to the Flamingo Trauma Recovery community. I started talking more about trauma-informed spiritual counseling. And in 2023, I also began to write a textbook called Fundamentals of Trauma-Informed Spiritual Intervention. And as I'm writing the textbook, on one hand, I'm like, wow, Conscious Coore, the woman who wrote the textbook on trauma-informed spiritual intervention. And on the other hand, I'm like, sis, a textbook? Really? But that textbook was a part of what led to the course, trauma-informed spiritual intervention. That's all it was. And in 2024, we started accepting students for the very first cohort. I definitely created as I went. I created the slides, and the slides helped me to begin to design and actually really put the textbook together in more detail. And actually, it was a workbook first. In 2023, I was writing the workbook. And then in 2024, the workbook and the slides all came together to create the textbook. And at the same time that I am preparing to teach this course, I was invited to speak on one of the biggest stages that I had ever spoken on before, on the topic of Jesus' theology of trauma-informed care. And the person who invited me to speak had no idea the direction that I was going in. When I wrote Trauma Informed God, she had purchased the book. She had purchased the devotional. She was probably one of 10 people, 5, maybe 3, who had actually purchased the devotional because I wasn't promoting it. And I also published it and let it go for free for a long time. But one of the very few people who purchased that devotional was the person who invited me to speak at a conference on the Jesus theology of trauma-informed care. And for me, it was, I recognized it as a debut of the full body of work that the Lord was calling me to. Not many people were taking the course at that time. It was a handful of people who enrolled, one of them being Rashida Davis, who at the time was working on completing her license and her PhD process. And, what's interesting is I saw things coming together, but I still also had a lot of questions about how I could be a part of something that felt so big and so real and so important, but not know what that meant for like my career, because I had done entrepreneurship before with my little, spiritual counseling sessions, like $80 a session, maybe. I don't even remember how much I charged at that time, but it wasn't paying the bills in New York City. Okay. And I lived in Manhattan. And in fact, I feel called to Manhattan. So these Manhattan prices did not match, what I was doing as an entrepreneur. So there was a lot there that I was wrestling with, having all of this vision and really producing at a high level, especially to be a teacher who worked at a charter school in New York City. But somehow not really feeling like I could take this all the way. Until May or April of 2025, when I had to take it all the way. I actually lost my job. And around February of 2025, the date April 17th dropped in my spirit. Or it was actually like there was a specific date where events were supposed to happen. And I said, okay, this will be the date that's going to be my last day. But I felt it so deeply. I felt it so much that I actually started creating an exit strategy. And the more I looked at that exit strategy, the more I realized that if I could make it to April 17th, I could probably make it to the next holiday, to the next paid holiday. I could probably make it through the summertime because the summertime is paid. So April 17th was a suggested date in my head. But April 17th, 2015, I was invited to an office. And that's when they told me they would let me go. And I was excited. I was happy. I actually went to the gym. I felt like I got my life back. I felt like I had an opportunity to act on some things related to continuing education, some business, trademarking, things that I needed to do to be able to protect the work and to make it mean something for people so that they could have what they needed. I couldn't do that. But on April 17th, I got my time back. And about a month and a half later, I was on another stage, on another panel, talking about mental health, not from the clinical sense, but alongside therapists. And I felt like it was such a mirror of what I had been doing all this time and what I would be doing moving forward. Because trauma-informed spiritual intervention is a conceptual foundation for faith integrated care across different industries. So I focused a lot on mental health and therapists, and 41% of the learners at the Institute are therapists, mental health professionals, psychiatric nurse practitioners. But then there is a population of people who are, they're coaches, they're ministers, they are lay ministers or counselors. They just feel like God has called them to do something, and it may not require clinical expertise or some type of degree, but because they know that they need to bring faith into it, it immediately calls for the type of intentionality around the risks and the role of doctrine and how we understand deliverance ministry and when we use it, when it's appropriate, when it's not, when it's relevant, when it's not. So I said all that to say, by 2025, I was seeing all types of different industries represented as, learners. And I was in conversation after conversation, platformed or in these spiritual counseling sessions talking about deliverance ministry, holistic health and counseling, trauma-informed care, what it looks like for real, not just conceptually, not just what we want it to be, but what is it, and what amount of deconstruction do we need in order to be able to adopt this in our work, and what level of deconstruction do other people need to be able to really have a holistic experience. Because when we're talking about doctrine, and this is a little bit about what we go into in the course, but when we're talking about doctrine, sometimes it actually serves as a defense against what we actually need based on what we think about God, what we think about scripture, how we see ourselves. So 2025 was, a year, quite a time actually. Things I can't share in this video. It was a thing. And Dr. Rashida, who had finished her certification in 2024, I invited her back to be on the board of directors as the Chief Impact and Strategy Officer. And that meeting was like a week after I was fired. I invited, elected some and invited others to be on the board. And I elected everyone who I had invited because they have real ties to the mission. They perhaps were in the Women in Deliverance course, or I walked with them through discipleship and they understood the work that I was doing. They were mental health professionals. They were certified. They understood. And so I invited them back to the board, and in May 25th, 2025, I had a moment on the altar at my church, and I heard the Lord say research. And so when I hear the Lord say something, I'm like, I gotta do something with this. I don't know what to do with this. So that was Sunday. Monday, I was like looking at research articles. I was emailing people who had already done research that felt like it aligned with what we were doing. And I reached out to them. I'm like, I would love to partner. I would love to work together. Did they respond? No. And so in my mind, I'm like, well, let me gather the research I can and I don't know, put it on my website. Like, Lord, I don't know what to do. But he said research. So I knew research had to be a part of what we were doing. And so at our next board meeting, January 2026, I gave it to the board and I told them the Lord said research. Dr. Rashida Davis, who had by that time completed her certification and her PhD with a focus on research, said, that's actually my area. And she and I have been building research teams, moving this effort forward, really leveraging, utilizing social media, and like big shout out to everybody who has responded to this effort to create research that now can show up in the literature as it relates to trauma-informed spiritual care and integration. And before I knew it, it wasn't just trauma-informed spiritual intervention course. anymore. And my life wasn't just about selling this course anymore. I felt such a deep alignment around mission. And that's when I realized that this is a school. This is an institute. This is an institute that focuses on education, but also research, training, rubrics, practice, feedback, all of the pedagogical things that I love and try so hard to hold on to. That stuff is still so important. And research. And bringing impact to clinical spaces. You know, I was doing workshops, I was doing student coaching, and, you know, there's this meme where it says, you know, I was telling God my ideas, and God said, no, bigger. And I used to think, okay, I guess, but I just lived it. So, yeah. That's how I went from being a substitute teacher to running an institute. To get involved, apply.